Israel's Exiled Sons, page 99. Perhaps it could be said that every generation of mankind has its religious movers and shakers, truth seekers and those who abandon the truth for the sake of hanging on to sacred cows, or perhaps for the sake of pleasing their peers, theological fanatics and fringe movements, and of course many middle-of-the-road masses that simply do not know what to believe for whatever reason. Certainly this generation proves to be no exception to the above, in that there is a current struggle going on that you may or may not be aware of between two religious groups with two different opinions. This battle involves a fairly large number of Jewish Messianic leaders and the people sitting under these teachings, who have publicly denounced a fairly large number of Gentile leaders and their followers, who strongly believe that they may be physical descendants of the exiled 10 tribes of northern Israel, missing in the midst of a deep assimilation among the nations for the past 2,700 years or thereabouts. This religious movement usually goes by the terminology of the Ephraimites, the returning house of Joseph, or the two houses. Among many of the mainstream Jewish Messianic leaders, this two-house Ephraimite teaching is considered filthy and heretical, especially as they present it to their followers as the Ephraimite error and other derogatory expressions. However, I think perhaps the real reason for their causticity is because the movement poses a real threat to their missionizing efforts, which is primarily aimed towards the Jews, when in fact the Ephraimite two-house focus is more centered on educating masses of Gentiles who need to know that they have a divine destiny to fulfill a long-standing series of prophecies, which we will discuss shortly. Put another way, I think the real issue among some modern-day Messianic Jewish leaders who are opposed to the two-house teaching is the strong possibility that they will lose massive donations from their high-dollar, high-financing, cash-heavy Gentile benefactors who support Jewish evangelism and ministries aimed at getting the Jews saved. Coupled with this, I believe the problem is also something that has scourged us Jews for centuries, that we have an ugly track record that labels us as arrogant and demeaning, and always behaving in high-handed rebellion toward Jehovah and our brothers, the Israelite northern kingdom. It is a haughtiness of giant proportions and a Jewish narcissism that simply cannot accept the fact that Jehovah wants to show mercy toward our exiled brothers of the northern kingdom, the Gentiles, and bring them, along with our own family of Yehudah, back into the divine inheritance of the Hebrew Torah, the land of Israel, and the Hebrew Messiah, exactly as it was described for us in Jeremiah 3:18. For example, read what happened to Paul when he was giving his testimony to the Jews regarding his own ministry. In a speech that he was making at the time, Paul was relating to the Jewish leaders that he had been divinely called to bring his message to the Goyim, as Acts 22:21 tells us. And he said to me, "Go, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles." In reaction to these words, Paul was greeted with no small crowd of angry respondents. And they listened to him up to this statement, and then they raised their voices and said, "Away with such a man from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live." And as they were crying out and throwing off their cloaks and tossing dust into the air. Acts 22:21 through 23. Similarly, read this account of dripping Jewish superiority, when Yeshua's Talmudim had to consider showing kindness to the Goyim of the Galil, that's the Galilee, referred in two places below and in Isaiah 60. And when he, Yeshua, went ashore, he saw a great multitude, and felt compassion for them, and healed their sick. And when it was evening, the disciples came to him, saying, "The place is desolate, and the time is already past. So send the multitudes away, that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Yeshua said to them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." Matthew 14:14 through 16. I would have to dedicate an entire chapter of many pages to show you the numerous examples of our disgusting attitude as it relates to the Gentiles, recorded in all of the Hebrew Scriptures. It is a serious problem that we Jews of the family of Yehuda, Benjamin, or Levi must overcome. And if it should help you, I would ask you to please forgive us Jews for acting this way. Suffice to say, I know that Jehovah is doing a great thing among the Goyim, and I believe that the focus of our attention now is not supposed to be towards Jewish evangelism, but rather Gentile evangelism, because when they, the Goyim, will open up their hearts and minds and immediately abandon their ways of Romish idolatry and attach themselves to the Holy Torah covenant and to its people, referred to as Israel, it will be the sign of events leading up to the final redemption and the coming of King Messiah ben David. With or without knowledge of this issue, it does not diminish the fact that this matter is one of several disagreements between the Jews and the Gentiles, creating no small amount of friction in the camps of many so-called Messianic ministries. In essence, I think everything boils down to this point as recorded in Luke 8:19 through 21. His mother and his brothers came to him, to Yeshua, and it was reported to him, "Your mother." So what about those Ephraimites? Page 101. As I said, the Ephraimites' two-house teaching is causing no small division in mainstream Messianic Jewish circles and some Gentile circles, primarily because there is a question over the validity of whether the large numbers of Gentiles coming into Torah obedience are actual physical descendants of the long-ago exiled 10 tribes of Israel. It seems that there is some fear that this is a resurrected doctrine of British Israelism and or replacement theology, which was popular among many Christians in England and in the U.S. about 100+ years ago. Proponents of this idea that the Ephraimite two-house teaching is resurrected British Israelism and or replacement theology, which basically says that the church is now the new Israel, believe that the lost 10 tribes have already returned and that they can be found within the ranks of what is today generally called the Jews. Others, largely more numerous than the opposition, would beg to differ, feeling quite strongly that they are not Jews per se, meaning physical descendants of the families of Yehuda, Benjamin, or Levi, but rather descendants of the other tribes. In any case, recall from the Hebrew Scriptures in 1 Kings that the northern kingdom was forcibly removed from the land of Israel, and by the divine hand of heaven in the time of Isaiah and Hosea, taken into a deep, long-lasting exile to the four corners of the earth, but nonetheless promised that it would not be forever, to fulfill Deuteronomy 30, verses 11 through 15, as it is written, "So it shall be when all of these things have come upon you, the blessing and the curse which I have set before you, and you call them to mind in all the nations where Jehovah your Elohim has banished you, and you return to Jehovah your Elohim, and obey him with all your heart and soul according to all that I command you today, you and your sons. Then Jehovah your Elohim will restore you from captivity and have compassion on you, and will gather you again from all the peoples where Jehovah your Elohim has scattered you. If your outcasts are at the ends of the earth, from there Jehovah your Elohim will gather you, and from there he will bring you back. And Jehovah your Elohim will bring you into the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. And he will prosper you, and multiply you more than your fathers." When fulfillment of the many prophecies like Devarim 30 verses 1 through 5 began coming to pass, it appears from Scripture that only Yehuda, Benjamin, and Levi were dispersed, but not necessarily implying a dispersion of deep assimilation and forgetfulness of one's identity, although this did happen in many locations of Jewish exile. However, the northern tribes of Israel were most definitely sent into a state of long-lasting banishment, where they were predestined to completely lose their identity and all connections to Jehovah's Torah. Generally speaking, these sons of Jacob, fated for banishment, were eventually mixed in with the